The Blocktalk Podcast started because of my passion for the property management industry. I wanted to start a conversation and add some value within the industry with a diverse range of people and professionals who can add something extra. As we start out, my aim is that the podcast offers some useful insight into a variety of views, opinions, thoughts, and foresights from our guests, who include business leaders and industry experts. If you enjoy the podcast and want to find out any other information, head on over to brianwelsh.co.uk. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blocktalk Podcast with me, Brian Welsh. Today we're delighted to welcome back Chris Ashurst, founder of the High-Rise Scotland Acton Group, which was formed in June 2020, which seems a long time ago now, to offer a forum for owners associations, owners and residents of high-rise developments in Scotland to facilitate communication with government and other relevant bodies. Chris retired in 2007 following 20 years with Mazars, where he was head of London corporate recovery and insolvency services. This is, we've spoken to Chris before and had a great chat, and this is just a follow-up. So great to have you on, Chris. Thanks for coming back.
Good to be back again. Nice to actually see you this time.
Yeah. We have this very new podcast studio in Glasgow. So maybe next time we speak, we can get you over for the day or for an hour or so. Yeah. So, okay. So last time we spoke was May 2022, I think. What's been happening since then? Could you give us an update on the latest news around cladding and your thoughts around those developments?
May 2022 seems a long time ago, and a lot has happened since then.
Yeah.
So last year in the autumn, eventually, the government introduced the bill to deal with the cladding remediation problem in Scotland.
Okay.
So that was introduced back in November, and it had its first vote a month or so back. So it's what's called an expedited bill because the government is anxious to try and get it working as soon as possible, with an operative date set for beginning of September this year. So it's a very quick process, which in itself has challenges to make sure that they get it right.
Yeah.
And the original idea of the SPA, just to remind you, was that independent reviews of the buildings should be undertaken where buildings are over 11 metres high to establish whether or not there were any problems with what we loosely talk of as cladding, better described probably as external wall systems, because as a layman like me, and as you said, I was an accountant, I think of cladding as the stuff you see hanging on the outside.
Yeah.
But actually, it is more than that. As an example, the building I'm sitting in at the minute has metal cladding, as I would describe it, hanging on the outside.
Okay.
But it also has some areas which look to the naked eye as concrete or render.
Yeah.
And whilst our cladding is the safest you can get, the metal cladding, which is very encouraging, we discover when we did have a survey done that actually behind the render there is another substance, and that is a cause of concern for us and for the surveyors. So these sort of surveys have been done. About 26 of them have been underway, paid for by the Scottish Government. They've proceeded. One building in Aberdeen has actually had work done it and has been remediated, paid for by the Scottish Government.
Okay.
The problem with processing this is that there are some buildings where the original developers, and it is the intention of Scottish Government that the original developers should pay for the cost of these repairs, remediation.
Yep.
But some of those original developers just don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Or aren't in a position to settle that bill, as it were. So I believe the building that has been remediated out of the provision of money that's come from Westminster But it was a reasonably small building, but at least one has been done.
Yep.
But when you think of the context in Scotland,
Yep.
of how many hundreds, and we still don't know how many hundreds of buildings there are, that is small fry.
Yeah.
And so they launched the pilot scheme, and it's been actually running, but the pilot scheme was just that. So that was one of the major developments in the last 2 years. The pilot scheme is actually up and running, but it was a pilot scheme. And the idea of a pilot scheme is to go first, find the way ahead, and also to discover difficulties along the way that you didn't know were there, because no one in Scotland's been down this route before. The regime in England is different. There are similarities, of course, but it hasn't been done here before. So discovering what needed to be discovered was itself a problem.
Yeah.
And as the surveys got underway, it was a bit like you lift this piece of paper and then you find some more underneath it. Oh gosh, we've got to do this as well.
Yeah.
And so it has grown a bit like Topsy. And that has really stretched resources in terms of civil servant backup power, in terms of numbers, just the number of people to try and process this, but also in the number of people who are able to do this sort of work. They don't, just grow on trees. There aren't that many of them. And so the scheme has actually quite dramatically changed since it was launched. So the pilot schemes are now closed.
Yep.
There are additional buildings which are on the government list, which will be dealt with. And the buildings where a single building assessment has been undertaken, those single building assessments and the technical information and risk assessments in those reports will now be taken and used in a refreshed single building assessment, if I can call it that. So the criteria have been changed.
Okay.
And so not starting from scratch with the 25, 6, whatever it is, buildings that have already had some sort of assessment, but using that information that will now filter into the refreshed assessments. But the huge change is that the government has decided, and this is a point of some discussion, and as it stands in the bill at the moment, that instead of the government overseeing and placing these assessments with people to do it, that has now been passed to the builders. So the very people who actually built the things and in owners' eyes caused the problem in the first place, are now being asked themselves to have assessments done in accordance with a set of guidelines which they have to comply with, but nevertheless, that in a sense the ball has been passed to some extent, or is being passed into the hands of the people who caused the problem in the first place. Now, one could say all sorts of things about that. The builders have said all sorts of things about that. They have largely been anxious to comply, because whilst that system is there, it's not simply that they're nice guys, they're putting their hands up and saying, oh dear, what a shame, we'll deal with it. There has been a carrot and stick situation, so that, as in England, there is to be a scheme where there are approved builders. And if you don't sign up willingly, there are remedies in the Act to enforce that, and also it seems to stop them building anywhere else in Scotland. So it's a carrot and stick situation.
Yeah, it definitely is, isn't it?
Yes, we willingly agree, but we've got our hands up behind our backs.
Yeah.
So it is yet to be seen how that will work out. And so there's a bit of a hiatus in the actual work on the ground at the moment, whilst there is this transition.
Yeah.
If you want me to stop there and ask anything, I will.
Yeah, no, that's a good. Two things come to mind. Yeah, one, what happens if the builder doesn't exist anymore? I mean, there's some fairly high-profile builders who have gone into liquidation recently. But also if someone does, if this problem happened 10 years ago and they don't exist anymore, how does that happen? But also, the other side of that, and this is the bit you probably didn't mention, how do homeowners and people you talk to all the time feel about the fact that, the people who have, as you put it, caused the problem are now being asked to come up with the surveys? That would seem to, I guess, a good chunk of the general public that's a conflict. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we do the second point first, actually that was discussed and debated at the hearing on Tuesday. The slightly strange procedure from my point of view, just trying to understand how legislation gets passed, is that the first reading of the bill, so it's the first attempt at getting it right, went before the whole of the Holyrood Parliament.
Right.
The second one goes to this reviewing committee, which oversees local government issues and so on, and they have been doing incredible work on it. And I have had to give evidence several times at Holyrood. Indeed, the committee actually decided that they would leave Holyrood and come and look at the building, so they came and had one of their committee meetings here in our home, and then walked around the building. So they've been thorough, and they have not been a rubber stamp on the suggestions coming from government. So the issue of essentially people marking their own homework has been pretty thoroughly discussed. And one of the an architect, a leading architect, giving evidence at Holyrood, actually when I was there, actually referred to this, marking your own homework. And most owners, perhaps I shouldn't say most owners, I will speak for myself and people I've spoken with, are very concerned about that. And one of the MSPs from Glasgow actually raised this point at the Holyrood Committee, where the second stage was dealt with on Tuesday, and raised it quite firmly, seeking to change the bill as it stands to make sure that this is actually overseen more tightly and dealt with perhaps slightly with regulation in a perhaps tighter way than is currently envisaged. And it is a real concern. Why would you trust them? Now, I'm not trying to slag anyone off particularly, but it's just, as you say, you immediately jumped on that. Surely there's a conflict of interest here. And if you are in a commercial situation where you are working for a company, and yes, you've got professional standards, and you have been asked, and they've got to be people who qualify in a specified way, and you've got to work with integrity. But there is a huge conflict when, Joe Bloggs Limited is paying your salary. Do I mention this? This is going to cost a lot of money. Can we get away with doing less? Those are the sort of thoughts that go through people's minds, and obviously through yours. And I think to say it's not resolved, whilst the issue was raised, the MSP who raised it agreed to postpone it until the final hearing, and the housing minister agreed to hear and listen further. And we'll have to see what they come up with. So we haven't got a long time scale here. This is about another month before it comes
before
back.
The final reading.
So it's pretty quick. And there are very substantial issues in here. Your first question about where there are no longer, the companies don't exist, and they're described as orphan buildings. So as with the example in Aberdeen, the monies that came from Westminster, and there are further monies to come, and will all be used in the process of the single building assessment, but they were used to pay for the actual work.
Yep.
And that money has been used as well in other developments. There have been at least one development where the assessment raised such serious issues that there had to be a decision as to whether or not they should evacuate the building.
Wow.
You can imagine a high-rise building in Glasgow with a lot of people in it. That's one big effort to undertake. So they actually put in and paid for a waking watch, and that money was used from that fund. So the idea is that where there are orphan buildings and the builders no longer exist, then that money would go to meet that. And there is also to be a levy that is to be is still being worked out as to how the building companies will pay for that. So that's in the current legislation. The thing is that where some and it's quite common, and as you know, my past history was that I was a liquidator and receiver. So it was quite common that companies were set up as a single development company. So, you would have one for this particular building, and then you'd have another for another building. That wasn't particularly unusual, and it wasn't meant necessarily to be deceptive. It was a mechanism for the way in which some companies operated. And
you can understand that to a certain point of view as well, because if you've got a building that's maybe not going too well, then the rest of they can keep it separate. Yeah, you can understand why they would do it.
So that's part of the reason. And so, and again, when the development has been completed, that company no longer has a purpose. It was for that purpose. Therefore, you put it to bed, and get struck off, wound up, and off they go. Now, the problem is where you have groups of companies, and I'm aware of a case where there was just such a development, and the single purpose company that was set up in fact went into administration. It's quite a huge block. So, for example, in the tallest stair in that building, it was meant to have 2 lifts. So, but because they ran out of money, they only got 1. And they had to get someone else in to finish everything off, and it was a mess. And that company was in administration. But it was part of a group of companies which still exists, still runs, and are currently bidding and proposing to do another development nearby in the same area. Now, this is where it gets a bit muddy, and the Scottish Government are very aware of this, that really just isn't right.
Yeah, no,
so
it's not at all, is it?
Again, speaking with my insolvency practitioner hat on, the whole thing is that the word limited or public limited company at the end of the title of the company means that if there are problems, the people who are owed money can only look to the assets of that company to meet those bills. Yep. So it's ring fencing everything. Yep. But in insolvency law, the liability of the directors of those companies is reviewed, and they may be banned from acting as directors in other companies because of their action there. And there's a whole set of definitions about what an associated person is, or associated companies, all these sort of things. So the Scottish Government in this context is looking to extend the net, not simply to the companies that carried out the work when the work was done, but other companies that might be in the group or part of the group and the group's resources to meet these bills. Now that's quite a fraught and difficult area, but nevertheless, that's the thinking. In other words, you can't just say, "Oh dear, what a shame, we'll put it into liquidation, off we go. Sorry about that, fellas, off we go. You pay.
We'll go make a shitload of money over here."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, but for the orphaned ones, for say a smaller development company who created it then, I don't know, 10 years ago, and then had a problem and went out of business, what we're saying is that fund from Westminster is going to effectively pay for.
Yeah, I mean, it's funds that come to Scotland by right under the method of allocation of funds. So for example, in England, they have this fund that they set up various, there's the share that comes to Scotland for issues in Scotland where UK legislation actually doesn't apply. So they passed a UK law, say, about buildings, since we're talking about buildings, but because of the devolvement of powers to Scotland, that act in England, in Westminster, cannot apply in Scotland. Neither do the resources from the tax revenues there cover it. So an allocation is made to Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland to cover issues in their provinces or countries. And so there is a system for calculating that, and we get a share when there is a law that is passed as exclusive to England but has bearing in Scotland. Then there will be a share out, if you like, that comes to us by right, and that it is envisaged that will be used to pay for these buildings.
Okay. So you might argue that someone in the past who has sort of seen the fair amount of disruption because their developer went bust are possibly in a better position now because the assessment is going to be funded not by someone marking their own homework, as you put it.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I think that it is a real issue, and certainly this architect was thundering against it, and so was I. But we just don't think that is appropriate.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think there's too many people who would think that's appropriate, to be honest. But okay.
So one of the words that was used an awful lot in the discussion on Tuesday was openness, transparency, and all this sort of stuff, which the Scottish Government are very keen on. But this is where it all becomes less than transparent, I think.
Yeah.
Arguing on the other side, just for 1 minute, to give a fair impression to people, that the pilot scheme have clearly disclosed that the problem is very widespread, as we already knew, but the resources in terms of people to actually administer multiple remediation projects at the same time simply don't seem to be there in the Scottish Government, which is that's not a criticism, it's just
a fact.
They don't exist.
Yeah.
So where do those resources exist? So you sit there thinking, well, probably they're in the building companies. So, gosh, they made the problem, so they better sort it out and deal with it. Now, that kind of slightly argues against what I just said, but you can understand the thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to pounds, shillings, and pence, doesn't it? It's cash. The Scottish Government don't have the money to they don't want to go and have to employ another 20 people to do this. So, to pass it back there, then that gets rid of the problem, I guess.
I mean, I think the thing is, it wouldn't be 20. They've already got 55 in the department dealing with this now.
Yeah.
Many of whom, kind of support staff and supposedly comms staff. But it's just, and the skills needed are quite specific.
Yeah.
So that, it is a problem. It is
Yeah.
a problem. And the builder's problem with this is, whilst they have willingly, in inverted commas, said we'll pay the bill, they say, yes, but what is the bill?
Yeah.
What
Of course,
is
they
it?
don't know that yet.
What are we being asked to do?
Yeah.
And I actually get on pretty well with some of the builders, and the whilst we have our different points of view, you can have some reasonable conversations with them, and their issue, and evidence was given, this is public knowledge, so that Holyrood, one of the builders, a fairly small, well, a smaller firm than some of the great big UK-wide builders, who's been going for a long time, and said, we've actually done a review of the buildings going back to 1982. We don't think we've got any problems. However, we are a small company, and that meant for us we had to go through a lot of papers, not all computerized.
Yeah, sure.
And actually, you are asking me to sign a declaration and a legal agreement saying I will pay for, or the company will pay for, the work that needs to be done, but you're not telling me what the work is that needs to be done.
Yeah.
So how can I sign a contract as a company director not knowing what the cost is of what you're asking me to do? So that's a very powerful argument. And one of the huge issues that is still being resolved, and is, I think, now being resolved, is what actually are the standards to which the buildings are to be remediated. One of the hiccups along the way was that in December 2021, I think it was, the Scottish Government introduced a new Scottish Advice Note about how to do single building assessments. And basically, it was either high risk or low risk. You assessed various things. If certain materials were in the external wall system, then you had to, the assessor had to say it was high risk.
Right.
If it was high risk, then it had to be remediated or removed or dealt with. Now, there was no degree, there was no grad.
Yeah, it's either one or t'other.
Now, I was one of the people who, when we were discussing this in the very first place, when the idea was just in its genesis, and along with the banks and the insurers, and actually most people around the table, we said, well, we need this to be cut and dry. We need to know is either it is safe or it isn't safe. Come on. That's the whole point, isn't it? We need to know where we're at. And so I was supportive of the binary system of yes, it is or no, it isn't. However, I have learned, and everyone else has learned as we go along, it's not as simple as that. There are risks we all live with every day. And you have to take a view on them and balance them with everything else. So again, the system is changing, and although that's Scottish Advice, as far as I understand, is still the standard that is actually there, it will not be the standard to which the new SBAs will be done. There will be an assessment of all the risks, but there will be not only identifying the risks, but taking them in, comparing them with other issues and measures in place to try and keep buildings safe. There will be some sort of gradation, if you like, which is sensible. I mean, we've got how many buildings over the hundreds of years in Scotland? We've got gas. It's risky. If someone had tried to introduce something back then along these lines, you've got gas in the building. Oh no, that's unsafe. You have to take that out. I mean, we all live with it. Yes, there've been fires, and sadly, there've been people who've died. But actually, there are risks which we all live with every day. So those risks have got to be graded.
Yeah, understood. Okay, moving on from that part of the questioning or the questions then. Last time we kind of talked about how challenging it was for property factors and property managers to navigate all of this.
Yeah.
Do you think that's improved at all? Is there a better understanding of the problem possibly?
There might be a better understanding of the problem. Whether or not it's moved on is another issue.
Right.
Some factors are embracing the idea of supporting their owners in a very good way, and others have rather distanced themselves, saying we're really only concerned with the management of and repair and so on of the building. Still, that is the case in some cases, sadly.
Yeah.
However, for them it has proved difficult. The act or the bill is, or some of the discussion in the bill has been about how you communicate with owners.
Yep.
You will know that there was a fire in Edinburgh a month ago, Breadalbane, and actually one of the MSPs was actually living in that flat and had to be evacuated.
I did not know that.
Strangely, he spoke at the debate on Tuesday. So one of the issues that he highlighted, and he put an amendment forward which actually didn't proceed, so it's out for discussion still, because came from his experience. So there's a big fire, but there is no one place where the rescue, fire services, police, whatever, can go to discover who the owners are and who should be in the buildings.
Yep.
And that seemed to be, and it was a problem for them there. Wonderfully, no one was injured. But, it highlighted the position. So the proposal he had was that there must be a list, not only of owners, but also of other people staying there. So in our building, we've got a lot of tenants. And actually in our building, we have got some short-term lets. And across Scotland, in these high-rise buildings, there are short-term lets. Yep. So if you have an instant in time and you want to know who is actually in the building, you haven't got the foggiest idea.
No, absolutely.
So there are practical...
a property factor knowing, I guess, thinking from a software point of view, property factor knowing, I guess, if a property has an absent landlord and is tenanted, they'll only possibly know that because the bill is going somewhere different.
Yeah. Well,
whether it be a letting agent or another.
Yeah, the bill. Yeah, I mean, if there is a letting agent, then they should be registered. There's a register, and so on. But nevertheless, contacting some of these people is different. I mean, some of them live abroad. It's just not, and you don't know who's going to be in the property. And, people stay in Edinburgh and in Glasgow too for 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights. How do you know that? And also, as the law stands at present, the factors' duty is to deal with the owners. That's what they're there for.
Yeah.
They can't deal with tenants.
Yeah.
That's beyond their powers.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's difficult. Now, I think... and one of the original ideas was that the factors might oversee these remediation schemes.
Yep.
I think it was in the government's mind that they would be paid to do for it. There'd be some sort of management charge, or they would get a project manager. Yep. But it's now moved, of course, to the fact that that would be the under the builders to deal with and do that. So that removes that from the factors. I mean, it's not they're divorced from the thing. But one of the issues has been communication. So there's another property I'm aware of in Glasgow where the builder has stepped up to the mark and says, yes, we'll do the work.
Yep.
But they've been trying to communicate directly with owners, and that's been a bit of a mixed bag. And then there's another one here in Scotland where they've written to the owners, and really their communication skills are dreadful. I mean, they scare the living daylights out of the owners. the way they put things. And
Right.
I think in the negotiating process between builders and government over the inclusion in the responsible builders scheme and the paying the bill for the works, in those negotiations, some builders have been kind of using every opportunity, it seems, to fire off shots, as it were, blaming the government for this, that, and the other. Now, it is true. The builders do not know what the cost is. There's no getting away from that. But some of the things that have been said and the way it's been put to owners has been less than helpful.
Yeah.
Most owners are interested in living in their flats and enjoying them. And actually, even the thing of a single building assessment and the fact there may be a risk in the building, they put it at the back of their minds. It's all, and they don't read stuff that's sent to them.
Yeah.
So there's a huge problem. I think it's still a huge problem for factors. They're doing their best. I think they're fighting an uphill battle. Owners associations are fighting an uphill battle to engage with people. So in our development here, where there's 277 flats, I think it is, the ethnicity of the people living here is very varied. So a lot of people, English wouldn't be their first language.
Yep.
So if you send a letter to them in normal business style, letter, either they're not going to read it because they can't, or they're not going to read it because there's an awful lot of small print in there, and I don't really, I haven't got the time or the energy to read through that, and I don't know I understand it anyway, and someone else will deal with it. So actually trying to get people to engage is huge. So we're working on a project here, have been with the Scottish Comms team, to try and, rather than put things on the government website kind of as bills or as documents that are quite dense, use graphics and so the guy who has been doing some of the drafting of the bill is a lovely guy who's Zimbabwean guy, and originally I showed him what we were doing here. So we've got a graphic that opens up, which we're going to use, and it just says info in kind of bright colours and so on the front. It's also got it in all dotted around on the screen in other languages. So we've got it in Russian, we've got it in Chinese, we've got it in, and he looked at what we'd done and he said, "That's my language," because we got his native language from Zimbabwe on it. But it got his attention immediately. Oh, that's my language. So it draws people in.
Yeah.
But it's a huge problem as to how to communicate with people. That's for factors, owners associations, and government.
Yeah, and I mean, there's always been an issue. I mean, I've interviewed many principals and property managers and manufacturing firms on this podcast, and one of the biggest challenges that they have is apathy in the developments and actually getting people to engage in these sort of things. So, but when it becomes something like this, which is extremely serious, but some people just want to put their head in the sand as well, because it must cause a massive amount of anxiety. They just really don't want to deal with it.
Absolutely, exactly.
Yeah. So okay. That's really interesting. So last time we spoke, I asked you if you had the power to do anything, or if you had the power to implement a solution tomorrow, what would it look like? And is that still relevant, or is that pretty much not going to pie in the sky kind of thing? But tell me what you think.
Well, it is pie in the sky. I mean, isn't it a lovely thought to get it remediated tomorrow? At the discussion on Tuesday, one of the committee members in questioning and speaking with the housing minister said, this is going to take at least a decade.
Yep.
And I think that's reality.
Yeah.
I think it's absolute reality. So I'd just love to be able to make it all happen tomorrow. The frustration of trying to cut through processes and so on, and get things done, and that is what really annoys owners. So the owners who do engage are largely the ones who are very cross, not just who are worried. The people who are worried also engage, but the people, of course, we have keyboard warriors. And I kind of approach the thing with government. Our commitment is that we will work with government. Some of the things that have happened along the way have tested that a bit, but we're not in wanting to be critical and cause additional problems. We behoves all of us, whether we're factors, owners associations, owners, or residents, to try and get this sorted as soon as possible. And listening to the minister and watching the minister at the debate on Tuesday, I found very difficult. I was listening to him, I was thinking, oh, goodness gracious, this is just pretty grim, really. And I was, in my mind, I was quite critical listening to him. But then I've read through it all in the detail and the complexity of it. Yeah. And as I've read it, I thought, I can understand why it came over like that. But you've got to say it. And there isn't really any other way to say it. It's just really difficult. So if I'm finding it difficult to follow, so people are angry, just don't have time for that. They just do it. They've had 98 million. Just spend it. Do it. But what are you going to spend it on? It doesn't join up, but just people's thoughts and reason leaves them, really. Their reason leaves them. So if I could, what could I do? I mean, I would just love to, I would love to have the resources within Scottish Government or an independent, they were talking at one point of setting up an independent kind of authority or something to deal with this issue. But if that could be done, so it removed the marking your own homework from the equation and get on with it. One of the commitments made last year and in the First Minister's programme for government for this year, there was a commitment that they would complete the survey of buildings in Scotland to establish just how many were high-rise buildings above 11 metres that should come into the scheme. And it was undertaken that would be in place by spring, which I think we're now in. So that has gone very quiet. I've been pressing for information on that. It seems not a lot has happened. It was at that time the First Minister wrote what he called mandate letters to each of his cabinet colleagues saying, this is what I expect of you this year, this is what you should be doing. And it's enshrined in one of those mandate letters. So here we are, sitting 2 years after my last interview with you, 4 years since we kicked this ball off down the road, and we still do not know how many buildings there are in Scotland that fit into this category. And if we could get that sorted, that would be wonderful. Then we can get some idea of the size of the problem. And I think that is a key thing. I would love for that to be sorted very quickly, so at least we begin to talk with knowledge about the size of it.
Yeah, because if it's taken that amount of time to get to this point and we don't even know, then a decade's probably it's probably going to be multiple of them, before they get it resolved. So okay, wow. My dog is about to come and sit. No, he's not.
All right.
He was going to come and say hello. Sorry, he's been sleeping very nicely down here. He's just got up. So anyway, okay.
To say, one of the pluses of this is that at least the plan is that there will be a regime up and operating in September.
Right. Okay.
as I said to the committee, we could have the best bill act in the world. Absolutely addresses everything, and it's just, that's the bee's knees. It deals with everything. But we might get the words right, but unless we have the resources in terms of manpower to deliver it, it's going to sit there and we're going to look at it and it's going to mock us because that is where the real issue lies. So we may get the act and it may work and it may be good and it may be super, and we might all say that was wonderful. And it might be there working in inverted commas in September, but actually we haven't got the people to do it.
Yeah.
And we're absolutely stuck.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, Chris, that we should have another chat then in about 6 months to a year's time and see where we've got to. That's been a very informative update, though, and very, very useful information.
That'd be great. Fine. Okay. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for coming on, Chris.
That's all right. It's nice to meet you again.
Yeah. Cool. We'll get you through to Glasgow next time, though. Thanks very much.
Okay. I know the way.